Lagi nating sinisikap mapagbuti ang kalagayan ng bayan.
Ang proseso ay mahirap. Ulit-ulit tayong madadapa.
Paulit-ulit, mabibigo. Ngunit alam ng universidad na kailangan nating tumindig at manindigan.
Alam ng universidad na makatitindig lamang tayo kung kakayanin nating maging balanse ang ating mga sarili.
Mga pulis, may sarili silang utak.
Dito, hinihikayat tayong makapagpahayag ng sariling pananaw.
May kasalanan. May naparil dito si Duterte, palagi may kasalanan. Tingin ko, hindi naman si Duterte may hawak ng barila.
At kung hindi man tayo sang-ayon sa ating naririnig, hinihikayat tayo ng universidad na patuloy pa ring makinig. Upang sa tamang sandali, makapagbato ng mga tamang tanong. Layan, tatanggang mo versus a single enemy, which is the doubt.
Opposing the Chikutan, were there any measures conducted by the local people to show support for this struggle?
Pinapaalala sa atin ng universidad na kailangan nating tandaan ang mga bakas ng trahedya. Tao man o kalikasan ng lugar.
Yung iba bang pero yung iba natural.
Ipinapaalala rin ng universidad na kailangan din nating tandaan ang yumi at luwalhati ng ating mga pamayanan.
Sa universidad, mahalaga ang pag-iingay upang ipaglaban ang karapatan ng mga pausbong na salinglahi. At kapantay ng halaga ng paglikha ng pini, ang halaga ng tahimik na praksis at pakikipamuhay sa ibig.
Minsan, sa hirap ng buhay, kakailanganin nating maghigpit at magtipid.
Sa mga ganitong sitwasyon, sino-sino pa ba ang magdadamayan? Mga kapwa-scholar ng bayan.
Pero, kahit tayo mismo ay salat, sa universidad, itinuturo pa rin at pinag-aalab ang diwa ng pakikipagkapwa at paglilingkod.
Sa universidad, itinuturo ang masusing pagsasaliksik at pagsisiyasat. Simula sa pinakamaliliit na mga bagay. Hanggang sa pinakamatatayog na mga nilalang.
may mga pagkakataong kailangang magseryoso.
Pero syempre, mas balanse kung paminsan-minsan, marunong din tayo magbiro.
Marunong tayong magdiwang. At marunong tayong makisaya.
See, bantay. Bantay. Very good. See, bantay, run.
Sa universidad, binibigyan ng sapat na panahon ang paghahanda. Ang husay ay paulit-ulit na hinahasa.
Sumali? Are you daydreaming again?
Pero minsan, talagang walang oras, walang panahon.
Ayos lang yun. Tuloy-tuloy lang. Dahil pihado, pagkatapos ng dusa, may kalayaang umanagwa.
Sa universidad, lagit-lagi ang paghimok na magwala sa sariling atin. Sa lahat, lagit-lagi rin ang paghimok na magtiwala sa sarili.
Ayos lang yan. Namimiss ka namin, pero joke lang yun. Ang picture, nandiyan na.
Ito ang balanseng pagbuo ng kamalayan.
Sa kahinaan at lakas,
Sa kabiguan at tagumpay, balanse ang aking tindig at pagkatao. Dahil produkto ako ng UP Baguio.
Maverick. Hello, Maverick. Hello, Maverick. Hello. Hello, is anybody there?
Hey, Dennis, we
Hello.
could hear you. Good afternoon.
Hi, Rosemary. Can you turn off the video for a moment?
Okay. Turn off now the video for a while.
Okay, very good. I have been able to figure out the problem I had with my screen share. So I want to test it and see if my screen share works, okay? Oh, okay, it's been disabled. You'll have to enable the screen share so that I can test it, okay? Hello, Maverick.
Hello, sir. Patrick will attend to your concerns, sir.
Okay, Patrick, I'm going to test out my screen share, but my screen sharing is still host disabled. So you'll need to give me permission to screen share. Okay, Patrick, are you there? Okay, I'm the co-host now. Let's see if the screen share will work. All right. Here we go. I think it's working now.
Yes, sir, it's working. You can see your screen now.
Okay, great, fantastic. Well, then I'll be able to shift the slides myself. And that way I can keep synchrony between my presentation and the slides. So I'll try to do that. Perhaps when we get started, as soon as the video is finished, I can put the screen share of the first slide up there at the very beginning while you're making the introduction, okay?
Sounds good, sir.
Yeah, all right, great, great. So should I turn it off now or what? Turn off the screen share? Stop the screen share?
Yes, sir. Maybe kindly stop the screen share and we'll proceed with the program.
We are facing one of the biggest challenges in history. Our earth is drying up. Don't let our future dry up before our eyes. Join me in starting a green revolution.
If we can warm up the earth, we can also cool it down. By greening up, it's that simple. The solution to climate change is vegetation. It's the air conditioning of our planet, and it eats carbon for breakfast. Through simple nature-based solutions, we can capture 20 billion tons of CO2 annually. This means that we can reverse climate change within 30 years. So let's green up to cool down. Here's how. With more tree cover on degraded farmlands and rangelands, we can triple the rate of biomass carbon. By increasing soil carbon and conserving the land, farmers can grow the size and reliability of crops and store huge amounts of carbon at the same time. By planting shrubs in food crops, we can capture carbon, fertilize crops, and provide wood fuel without reducing arable land. That's why millions of farmers in Africa have already adopted this. By 2050, the carbon stored from nature-based solutions can be used to bring energy to hundreds of millions of people. We have 4 billion hectares of forest land in the world, of which 1.7 billion hectares are degraded and treeless. Through empowering communities, we can turn 575 million hectares into healthy forests again. And last but not least, by suppressing fires and by regenerating pastures, we can bring back a healthy grass-tree balance, enhance food production for livestock, and improve animal welfare. So, dear members of the United Nations, the solution to climate change has already been found. These methods work. The only thing we need to do is to embrace them and join forces. Together, we can speed up and scale up. Together, we can reverse climate change. So, let's green up to cool down.
Hello. A good day to our fellow Filipinos, students, scholars, researchers, advocates, friends, and colleagues in the Philippines, and also to our distinguished visitors across the globe. Welcome. Pumali kayo. I am Mr. Maverick N. Tamayo, the chair of the UP Baguio College of Science Native Plants Committee, and I will be introducing today's webinar. But before anything else, I would like to acknowledge the following for making today's event possible. Dr. Rosemary Gutierrez, former College of Science Dean and current graduate program coordinator of the Master of Science in Conservation and Restoration Ecology of UP Baguio. Dr. Ravindra C. Joshi, former visiting professor of the Department of Biology, College of Science, UP Baguio. Dr. Ronnie J. Kalugay, former chair of the College of Science Lecture Series Committee. Professor Junli Lazaga, the director of the College of Public Affairs, Ms. Jen Gimpol of OPA UP Baguio, the UP Baguio Systems and Network Office, and of course, the members of the lecture series and Native Plants Committee, the Department of Biology, and colleagues from various institutions, NGOs, who acknowledged, support, and disseminated the information to their peers and colleagues. Thank you very much. Today's webinar is entitled Evergreening the Earth and Opportunities for Landscape Restoration in the Philippines by no less than Dr. Dennis Garrity, former General Director of the World Agroforestry. Before we start with our webinar, let me have the general reminders. Make sure that your audio is turned off during the webinar. Our session is recorded. Open forum is reserved at the end of the presentation. The Zoom webinar is monitored by Mr. Patrick James Penales. The FB Live is monitored by Ms. Stephanie Tirao. The YouTube Live is monitored by Ms. Ethel Ruth Bakiran. Observe proper etiquette. Please indicate your name and affiliation when asking a question. And also, make sure that your questions are brief and direct to the point. Lastly, don't forget to answer our survey at the end of the presentation, for this will be the basis for the issuance of the certificate. With that, I would like to give the screen to our webinar moderator, Mr. Jenoray Pagaduan.
Thank you, Maverick. And so again, I am Jenoray Pagaduan, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's event. Our resource speaker for this webinar finished his BS degree in agriculture at the Ohio State University, USA, and graduated summa cum laude with distinction in agronomy. He is also a UP alumnus himself, having finished his MS degree in agronomy at UP Los Baños. He then pursued his PhD in agronomy from the University of Nebraska, USA, with crop physiology as his field of specialization. Our webinar speaker is a world-renowned research leader, a systems agronomist with an extensive and productive experience in the field of conservation and restoration of degraded lands. His career has focused on improving small-scale farming systems in the tropics. He has been serving as Drylands Ambassador for the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, emphasizing the role of agroforestry, evergreen agriculture, and land care for sustainable land management. From 2001 to 2011, he served as Director General of the World Agroforestry Center. He is currently chair of the board of the Global Evergreening Alliance, a partnership of nearly all of the major development and conservation organizations around the world, working together to restore hundreds of millions of hectares of degraded lands and enhance the livelihoods of millions of the least favored smallholder farm families in the tropics. He also chairs Land Care International, a worldwide effort to support grassroots, community-based natural resource. Friends, students, faculty, research staff, and all viewers who are participating in this live stream, please welcome our webinar speaker, Dr. Dennis Philip Garrity. Dr. Dennis?
Hello, everybody. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. It's great to be with you today. I'm broadcasting from Los Baños, where my wife, Vilma Kaluya Garrity, and I are staying with our son, John, and his family, and including our brand new granddaughter, Zadie, who just arrived a few weeks ago. I am so thankful to Dr. Rosemary Gutierrez and to UP Baguio for making this event possible. It's a terrific occasion for me to be able to rebuild my linkages here in the Philippines as I pivot back to living here after spending so many years in Africa. We're going to be talking today about land restoration, its value in improving productivity while enhancing people's livelihoods and the environment, as it contributes to drawing down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We'll be focusing specifically on the opportunities for restoration in the Philippines, in the context of the tsunami of interest that has occurred during the past couple of years in the recognition of global restoration opportunities. I hope that the discussions today will perhaps lay some groundwork for a new momentum towards a nationwide movement in restoring the ecological integrity of the Philippines, one of the richest biodiversity hotspots on the planet. Now let's get started with some pretty good news. Tree cover in the Philippines is increasing again. This is a pretty big deal because for over a century, the forest cover of the country had been on a very long and steep decline, but not any longer. Tree cover has begun to rebound, to recover, slowly perhaps, but the curve is now upward in the right direction. The question is, can this positive trend now be accelerated? Can it build up a real momentum in the coming years and decades? Could this encouraging trend be the basis for a national movement that mobilizes action in every community, in every part of the country, to restore tree cover and to do so in ways that benefit local people? I believe that it can, and I believe that Filipinos everywhere can begin to rally around this goal. Why? Because I've been engaged in making this very rebound happen in many other countries, in other parts of the developing world, particularly in Africa. We'll get back to this topic a little later, but first, I'd like to zoom in to examine this budding movement and how it fits into the global picture. As you know, the CO2 content of the atmosphere has been going up and up. This trend has been fundamental in driving the rapid and catastrophic nature of climate change. We all know that we've got to take a very serious approach to reversing the trend and reversing our willing destruction of the planet. We are exhausting our atmospheric carbon budget, and unless we not only race to zero in fossil fuel use by 2050, and also begin drawing down vast quantities of carbon dioxide that have already been deposited in the atmosphere, we will never be able to avoid catastrophic increases in global temperatures above 2 degrees centigrade. So we've got to do both. And as you see in this projection from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, by 2050, we've got to be in the territory of drawing down CO2 and go into a net negative situation as the century proceeds. I chair the board of the Global Evergreening Alliance. The Alliance now has about 50 member organizations They include virtually all of the biggest development and conservation NGOs working around the world, and many, many regional, national, and smaller grassroots organizations as well. And many research organizations are participating that provide technical support to the Alliance. The Alliance's mission is to achieve massive impact in land restoration globally. It has mobilized its members and our partners in the United Nations agencies and governments throughout the world to implement regional and national restoration programs. And by the way, if your organization wishes to join us as a member, just let me know. It's a simple process to do so. We knew that we needed to do more than simply engage in restoration. We needed a big, hairy, audacious goal to inspire action at all levels, from the global right down to the individual community level, in order to take the urgent action that we need on restoration. We analyzed the abundant recent literature that shows clearly the enormous potential for nature-based solutions to be a cornerstone of the carbon dioxide drawdown effort. Peer-reviewed studies published in Nature and Science and elsewhere have shown that there's a great potential to establish 1 trillion more trees on the Earth's surface and to restore degraded soils and ecosystems everywhere. Taking this evidence base into account, we developed a white paper that captured the magnitude of the possibilities for drawing down CO2 from the atmosphere. We added up the streams of realistic possibilities, and we established the goal to be capturing 20 billion tons of CO2 every year by mid-century, while improving productivity and caring better for the land. That goal is the basis for the Evergreening the Earth campaign, which was launched at the United Nations last year. And we are determined to achieve it. The goal is made up of 6 target areas for capturing and storing more carbon in our landscapes. We've articulated unique strategies for degraded farmland restoration, degraded forest land restoration, and degraded rangeland restoration. I'd like to take us through some of the particulars of these targets and the practices that can enable us to achieve them. Let's start with the farmlands and the enormous potential for cropping area to achieve carbon capture through agroforestry. There are 1.4 billion hectares of arable croplands in the world, and we know that nearly half of this agricultural land already has more than 10% tree cover, and it is increasing year by year. But there is enormous potential for integrating more trees on farmlands and storing much more carbon while increasing crop and livestock productivity at the same time. For example, take the case of Niger, a country in the Sahelian zone of Africa, where over the past couple of decades, millions of farm families have literally nurtured useful trees on their fields, as you see here. And in the process, they have transformed landscapes such that the practice of farmer-managed natural regeneration of useful trees has now spread over 7 million hectares throughout the country. And as you see here, all of the land in this photo is cropland. Although it looks like a dryland forest, it is cropland with about 50 to 100 trees per hectare, increasing yields, providing fodder for livestock, and improving the moisture conditions for resilience to climate change. Likewise, this practice has spread to many other countries in Africa, such as Mali, for example, where farmers harvest fruits and crops in a system that increases the yields of both. Agroforestry has enormous potential to further accelerate this process of productivity and carbon increases. The second major target area is increasing soil carbon through conservation farming practices, which we estimate can be done on 500 million hectares of additional agricultural land and storing more carbon per hectare per year. Conservation agriculture is already being practiced on about 180 million hectares, and therefore we see its potential for doubling and tripling over the coming decades. One of the most interesting and exciting practices that is now spreading in Africa is culturing the species Acacia albida, a leguminous tree that is planted at 100 trees per hectare and dramatically increases crop yields while restoring the soil. The unique thing about this tree is that during the growing season, it loses its foliage. It's dropped its leaves, which fertilize the soil. And now, as you see here at the end of the dry season, the foliage comes back and the tree grows during the dry part of the year after the crops have already been harvested. Another practice that is now picking up is the integration of leguminous shrubs on farmlands. And that can be done on some 350 million hectares and store an additional 2.5 billion tons of CO2 per year. This practice can also not only improve crop yields, but also provide abundant wood for energy. In Sri Lanka, this country has taken up this practice with a passion, and it's practicing the integration of these leguminous shrubs in all of its cropping systems and plantation crops, such as coconuts, as you see here, providing wood for electrical power generation. In Sri Lanka, leguminous shrub wood is now powering many power plants, from village-sized units, such as you see here, all the way up to industrial scale plants of 5 to 15 megawatts of power that are achieved by the use of the wood chips as a product that farmers produce on their land. So here's a way of actually overcoming our problem of growing enough wood to capture carbon. And that is through the practice of leguminous shrubs integrated on the same cropland where we're growing our crops. The opportunity that we're seeing now is the south-south extension of a fully commercialized food and energy integrated system from Sri Lanka to the Philippines and to Africa, where it is already being taken up in several countries. This is an area that I hope we can explore in the discussions following this presentation. The fifth area of target is the degraded forest lands of the world, and these are enormous. There is 1.7 billion hectares of forest land that is in fact treeless, on which at least 1 trillion new trees could be established. Our target is to restore this degraded forest land to healthy forest ecosystems, primarily by deploying the simple, cost-effective practice of assisted or enriched natural regeneration of trees by local communities throughout the tropics. Ethiopia is a country that has taken this up with a passion, and over millions of hectares. Working with communities, watersheds have been closed off for a period of time to enable the revegetation of vast areas of totally degraded land where hardly a green sprig was available on these mountain watersheds. But today, millions of hectares have already been regenerated with this system, and it is expanding annually. And so the restoration of degraded forest land systems based on assisted natural regeneration has enormous potential for being applied all throughout the Philippines, Southeast Asia, and other continents around the world. Our sixth and last target is referring to degraded pasture lands. There are billions of hectares of degraded pasture around the world, and we see the possibility of regenerating a truly healthy grass-tree balance on hundreds of millions of hectares of these degraded rangelands. And this can be done both through regenerative grazing systems, which are coming up fast, that increase carbon as they are grazed under improved systems of management, and pasture regeneration through managed natural regeneration of trees to get that healthy balance between trees and grasslands. Well, this slide summarizes the target areas and the way in which we foresee the targets being achieved. On the left side, you'll see our current emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which are up near 40 billion tons per hectare. Now, about 50% of that, the blue bar, is actually being absorbed by the oceans and the terrestrial ecology already, and that happens on an annual basis. The other 50% needs to be reduced through massive global decarbonization from fossil fuels. And then we get into the 6 target areas on the right side of this drawing, which show how each of these targets in agriculture, forestry, and grasslands can contribute to a 20 billion ton goal of reduction in CO2 so that we get into negative emissions territory by the end of the mid-century, 2050. Well, let's talk a little bit about the elements of evergreening success, how we're going to build on these elements in order to achieve our goal. First of all, of course, building awareness about the campaign and the simplicity and doability of the particular practices which we call evergreening solutions to be able to be applied on hundreds of millions of hectares by local communities and individual farm families to their own benefit. Second, action by everyone, and we're already on our way. People are beginning to use their collective voices to demand change. Now we need to direct them to showing how everyone can be involved in the restoration generation, and public and private organizations of all types can act and engage. Third, we need to set targets. We believe that targets are important to focus the minds of people, to focus national commitments, and to cascade those targets from the global to the national, to the subnational, and to the very local level at the community. We need to empower and implement the campaign at the grassroots level, and that will involve engagement all over the country. We need to build capacity within and among the organizations that are involved in restoration, particularly their staff, to be able to do more and better evergreening. And we need to track the impact from the local all the way to the global level using the latest geospatial technologies to precisely quantify and monitor the increase in tree biomass. Now, many of you are working with research organizations that are participating in this dialogue and seminar today. So I'd like to say a few words about what could be the research agenda to support this massive effort. First of all, I believe that there's a great opportunity as well as need to do further analytics to examine and underpin the 6 campaign targets that I've shared with you. We also need methods to cascade those targets, to actually get the estimates right so that the targets are realistic as well as inspiring. We need to do methodological development for very large landscape carbon projects, because scaling to the level that we're talking about has never been done before. And we need to investigate the massive scaling up of practices like the leguminous shrubs that I mentioned, because they have such an enormous implication for energy production, in electrical power, as well as in carbon capture and storage. And finally, we need to do the feasibility studies that can achieve a new electrical power generation system from shrubs biomass, as they have already done at the national level in Sri Lanka. So these are a few of the areas that I believe there could be great potential for research. There are many, many others, of course, and we should add to this list as we go along. I'd like to also mention that the Global Evergreening Alliance is involved with the development of a number of large-scale regional restore programs in different continents around the world. We have already developed programs for the Sahelian zone, and now Eastern and Southern Africa and Australia, major restoration program that is ready to launch in Australia. And currently we're developing new programs in South Asia, Latin America, East Asia, and the West African drylands. I have highlighted the East Asian drylands because this is close to home. The Philippines will be included as part of the East Asian drylands restoration program. And we look forward to sharing more of the opportunities that will arise as this program begins to take off. Well, let's take a look at the Philippines. You know, if you look at the land cover map of this country and you focus in on those orange areas as well as the yellow areas, these are areas typically defined as degraded. Degraded because, as the legend shows, they are either barren wastelands or shrublands, scrubby vegetation, or fire climax grasslands that burn every year and, of course, continue to degrade in terms of their soil quality. Well, if you look at the map of the Philippines, you'll see that there's an enormous area of this country that is found in those 3 categories of land use. And for those of us at UP Baguio attending this seminar, you can see that much of that area in the north is covered by these categories of degraded land. So there is an enormous potential in the Philippines for achieving restoration around the country. But as I said, there is positive evidence that things are beginning to change and the curve is shifting upwards. You know, this example is from the Pantabangan Dam watershed. That's an area where I visited first back in the mid-1970s, when it was totally dominated by Cocan and Femida grasslands that were burned every year. And this, on the left side, you see a satellite image from 1984 that shows you how degraded those watershed ecosystems were above the level of the reservoir. It was hard to imagine in those days that these lands could ever be restored to healthy tree cover. But it has been happening. As you can see by looking at the right side of the image, for us, a shot from 2018, restoration is occurring on the hill slopes in the Pantabangan Dam watershed, and it's occurring in some really harsh environments. Good news that can be further extended by our work. Here's another example of a major restoration that was achieved even in a region of very, very high population density, the National Capital Region. This is the La Mesa watershed, and you can see here from 1988 up until 2016, a major increase. First a decrease down in 2002, and then a major increase in forest cover by 2016. Again, evidence that even under very severe population pressure, with leadership and care, restoration can be successful. Now imagine if we could do these historical analyses across the entire country as a guide to prioritizing future restoration efforts. That's something to think about. Going back to agricultural land, we have seen also in our global analyses that in a region like Southeast Asia, there has been a positive change in biomass carbon through tree cover increases on agricultural land in many countries in the region. You can see the very dark purple in Indonesia and parts of the Philippines indicate quite a large increase in tree cover on agricultural land, where more and more tree crops are being grown. There's also an increase in parts of Thailand and Vietnam and Cambodia as well. Agricultural land in Southeast Asia in general is increasing in tree cover, and that can be further accelerated. How do we do the mapping analyses effectively to be able to create the kind of mapping data that we need for prioritization and planning for restoration? Well, there's good news here as well. There is a technique called Collect Earth, which was developed by FAO and is a free tool on the FAO website that enables any non-specialist actually to examine satellite image data at high resolution and to calculate the tree cover. And as you see in this example, the change in tree cover in a particular area over a period of years as the trees are established and grown. This technique has been applied now in hundreds and hundreds of locations around the world and has been taken up in such things as we call mapathons, where groups of 20 or 30 students work together, each getting a set of images to analyze. And very simple tool can be used to achieve a full set of data about tree cover and many other parameters of land use change using this technique called Collect Earth. Go to the FAO Collect Earth website and you can download and examine how this particular tool could be used in universities, research institutions, and NGO staff. We can really mobilize to examine and track tree cover changes effectively now. And you know, if we look at a whole region where this technique has been applied, this is Central America, which interestingly is an area of land about the size of the Philippines. And we see that we have already a high resolution image analysis done by my colleagues at the World Resources Institute that enables us to pinpoint exactly where tree cover is increasing. And that is the green and dark green areas on this map where tree cover has increased over the past so many years. Whereas there are areas also in red where there's been a net loss in tree cover as well. So we can begin to get a very good examination of this. And imagine the power of having a map like this for the Philippines with high resolution tree cover analysis as the basis. What an opportunity it would be to create a roadmap for restoration in every community in the country. So how can we mobilize to develop a national movement and really get things going on an accelerated basis in this country? Well, a few things that we could consider are, of course, detailed mapping of tree cover change at high resolution. That gives us a good baseline of understanding of where we are and where we've got to go. Second, developing regional and local land restoration plans that can be used, number three, to mobilize at the municipality and barangay levels through participatory mapping and planning exercises. Exercises that bring people in to take ownership of what can be done that would be good for them and good for their communities as we work up, back up to the national and global levels. Might we consider also creating a national working group to get started in this big but promising enterprise? Might we consider a restoration working group that brings government and non-government organizations together to develop this plan? The Philippines, unfortunately, has yet to make a national pledge to the bond challenge. Many countries have done so, but for some reason, the Philippines has not declared what is its restoration target. That's a great opportunity for us at this time, because perhaps a working group could get to work on that. I've worked with many countries in Africa to do just the kind of analysis to make their pledge to what is known as the Africa Restoration Initiative, or AFR 100. This is a really big thing to mobilize the policy processes that will in the future underpin the achievement of the pledge. In other words, when a national government makes this pledge publicly, as the nations have done in the Paris Climate Agreement, it puts the onus on each country to get to work and figure out how it will mobilize to achieve those goals. Well, I've come to the end of my presentation, and I'd like just to refer you to the white paper that contains a lot more details about the Evergreening the Earth campaign that I described briefly, and the Alliance website, which you can have a look at to look at your various interests in participating in the Evergreening Alliance. And at the bottom is my email address to explore with you how you and your organization may want to get involved. So if you have an interest in furthering the dialogue, get in touch. I'd be glad and very delighted to have a chat with you about it. So Rosemary and all of the folks who have organized this event, thank you once again. And all I can say from now on forward is onwards to Philippine restoration. Thank you so very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Garrity, for that very informative talk and informative and encouraging talk. I believe there's a part for the discussants first to give their share.
Yes, we have three discussants, Jano. Dr. Rosemary Gutierrez will lead off, and then we'll have Dr. Ravi Joshi, and then Dr. Rodel Lasco. Each will get about 4 minutes time. Dr. Gutierrez, the floor is yours.
Yes, sir. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. The Department of Biology, College of Science of the University of the Philippines, Baguio, is greatly honored and privileged to have Dr. Dennis Garrity, a world-renowned research leader and scientist, as our resource speaker for our webinar today. In his talk, we heard Dr. Dennis Garrity discuss about landscape restoration processes that take care for the lands in the countries in Africa, Asia, and other parts all over the world. These restoration processes clearly benefit in many ways the people whose livelihood depends on these lands. As we know, some of the major causes of land degradation are deforestation, poor grazing management, inappropriate tillage practices, soil nutrient depletion, and adverse climatic conditions. For us here in northern Luzon, particularly in the Baguio, Benguet areas, aside from agricultural practices, the major cause of land degradation are the mining activities that often lead to landslides that cause the loss of the lives of many people. I think the aspirations of the Evergreening the Earth campaign, which Dr. Dennis Garrity shared to us today, are very well aligned with the MS CARE program or the Master of Science in Restoration Ecology program of UP Baguio. Please allow me to share with everyone who are with us today the MS CARE program goals. We at the Department of Biology envision our graduates to be competent environmental biologists who can lead and undertake projects in conservation, assessment, monitoring, and restoration of degraded ecosystems. We also envision them to be trained to carry out research in conservation and restoration ecology and be ready to pursue PhD courses in related fields. Our Department of Biology, with its growing roster of professors with varied yet harmonized fields of expertise, has its research and extension work focused on the following: biodiversity assessments and data banking, conservation, and the ethnobotany of the ecosystems of northern Luzon from the mountain ridges to that of the reefs. This is consistent with UP Baguio's mandate to perform its unique and distinctive leadership in higher education and development and to lead in setting academic standards as well as initiating innovations in teaching, research, and community service in its identified niche in the Cordilleras and the rest of northern Luzon. We are therefore optimistic that we can be partners with Dr. Dennis Garrity in a collaborative approach along with the communities, organizations, and government units to start with restoration projects in the degraded lands of northern Luzon. And who knows, we can initiate, of course, with the help of Dr. Dennis Garrity, a nationwide restoration program. Under the guidance of Dr. Garrity, we look forward to start to develop local and regional restoration plans. So in behalf of our Dean, Dr. Difna Javier, our Department Chair, Dr. Roland Hipol, I would like to thank Dr. Dennis Garrity for sharing with us your Evergreening the Earth campaign and opening the opportunities for collaboration with us. I also thank Dr. Ravinder Joshi for linking us with Dr. Dennis Garrity. Dr. Joshi, it's your turn.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Dennis, for sharing a very simple presentation on the Global Evergreening Alliance. Always, Dr. Garrity is superb. Since my college days at the UPLB, and he being my co-advisor, I learned a lot from him. And I'm sure most of the participants at this webinar now have a good grasp of the global greening campaign and how they can actively engage with it through various opportunities that Dr. Garrity highlighted in his presentation. I also think that it is important in future, we need to have a series of webinars as well by other key partners of the Global Ever Greening Alliance. We saw in the one of his slides, which shows uh, various stakeholders, various partners at both at the international level, at the regional level, and at the local levels, and at the country levels. So I think we need to build up on this to move this campaign forward in the Philippines. In Philippines, you mentioned about the good news, and I think it's very clear from your various presentation. The tree cover is increasing in the Philippines again slowly, based on the tree cover high resolution maps that you presented. However, the challenge is how to make this curve move uh, upward at a faster rate. And you also explained to us through various research agenda and various mechanisms on how to move this alliance in the Philippines forward. I observed in the research agenda that you presented, there were 5 major areas that you considered, and I think it's important, being an invasive species specialist and having taught invasive species program in many countries, I feel that the impact and the management of invasive species in restoration programs is equally important in this alliance. You mentioned about the 2 bad news that we have in this in your presentation, which I totally agree. One was the rising atmospheric carbon dioxide level. In relation to this, the invasive species are favored, especially invasive plant species as well as other invasive species, and they are resulting in the loss of native biodiversity, reduction in forage availability, wildlife habitat, disturbance in nutrient dynamics and water balance, as well as other impacts. I wrote a paper, I wrote a review article on this, and I will be willing to share if anybody is interested. I wrote this article for a CGIAR when they asked me to look at what are the impacts of increasing carbon dioxide concentration, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration on different kind of biotic stresses. The second bad news that is that the invasive species are extending their distribution in many dryland agricultural lands, including pasture lands and forest land areas, and they're further contributing to the desertification and loss of ecosystem services. We had a project here, the CABI, which is an international organization who heavily works or have a good global programs on invasive species. And I, being an associate of CABI, we had a project many years back here in the Philippines, which looks at invasive plants in agricultural and forest lands in the Philippines. This was a joint project with the DENR as well as with the UPLB and other NGOs. So these reports clearly indicate the importance of invasive species in relation to climate change and in terms of the impacts on different ecosystem services and their implications in restoration ecology. I like to give two examples of invasive plants right from Baguio. I think those are two classical examples, and I'm sure many of the people that are attending would know these two invasive plants. There are so many invasive species in the Philippines, which is listed, which also are included in the world 100 worst invasive species by the IUCN and the Philippine Invasive Database. So one of them is Lantana camera, which most people know that bang bang sit or baho baho. That means they smell bad, and that's a local term. And you can see whether even when you are passing through from the lowlands going to Baguio, you can see on both sides of the national highway the lantana being invaded in most of the areas, including agricultural lands. So this species was also heavily discussed in the CABI project here in the Philippines. And the impacts of these are not only in the forest plantations, but as well as in agricultural lands, including orchards, pasture land, wastelands, and also in natural areas. They provide there are a lot of impacts, and some of them to mention is that they are even increasing the risk of fire, and they are poisonous to many livestock, including they are host of numerous other kind of pests and diseases. The second is a tree, which is the African tulip. It's locally called as sirit sirit. This, it forms a lot of thicklets which can shade and outcompete surrounding plants. You can see all over Baguio now, it's been widely distributed. They were introduced as an ornamental plant, and now they have become a serious problem in not only in the Philippines, but even in many Pacific Island countries, including Hawaii and Fiji, because I worked in Fiji before, and I have seen many areas in Fiji, the agricultural areas, they are completely covered by this African tulip. In other countries like in Cuba, they are one of the biggest problems in coffee plantations. And one of the impact which was studied, and which is where an entomologist was involved, was that this tree even kills native bees, which are important pollinators. So based on, we do not have, I don't have much time to discuss other invasive species and their impacts on future programs that
Yes,
we are planning to do here. And thus in the Philippines, we need to tackle invasive species to restore forest and agricultural degraded and deforested drylands and in drought-prone areas. Therefore, it should be one of the major research and capacity building activity in any active restoration programs in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. And now we'll pass the microphone to our colleague, Dr. Rodel Lasco, who is the head of the ICRAF, World Agroforestry team here in the Philippines, and has been involved in forest restoration and agroforestry for many, many years, and well known to many of you, I'm sure. Rodel?
Yes, good afternoon to all of you. And it's a pleasure to listen to Dennis, as always, and his passion for evergreening, the world. And in the Philippines, my #1 comment is that we have the National Greening Program. So there is a very high alignment with the programs of the government. Even the name sounds familiar: Evergreening, National Greening. So I think that's something to build on. My second point is that in the Philippines, we need to take a second look and a hard look at our policies, governing, for example, the use of trees. As you know, there has been a kind of flip-flopping in policies, thereby discouraging both smallholders and even large-scale uh, planting of trees because of certain policies regarding the use of tree products or harvesting of tree products, transport of tree products as well. My third point is that in terms of the science, I see a large role for UP Baguio and other state colleges and universities in doing research and making the case for evergreening our country. They are well positioned, they're strategically located in many parts of the country, and there are many advocates within those universities for these kinds of approach. And my last point is the role of the private sector and local communities, including indigenous peoples. The private sector has a role to play. They can provide investments and markets to make sure that our engagement and our activities, our greening programs are sustainable and that they are able to help enhance the livelihoods of our farmers located in these areas. So I also would like to suggest, of course, involving and the participation of smallholders, local communities, including indigenous peoples, because there are millions of them currently in these areas that we are targeting for greening. So let me stop there. I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of questions to Dr. Garrity. And again, congratulations for the paper. Thank you so much.
Okay, so again, thank you very much, Dr. Dennis Garrity, and also to our discussants, Dr. Rosemary Gutierrez, Dr. Ravi Joshi, and Dr. Rodel Lasco. And so for our participants, I know you're very much excited to shoot your questions, but first, we'll just have a 5-minute break. So maybe use that to formulate your questions. No? So as mentioned by Sir Garrity, he's ready to be grilled, with your questions. But before we proceed to the break, also just a brief reminder for all of our participants to have your certificate for attending this webinar. Please don't forget to answer the Google form later, the evaluation form, which will be found in a link that we will put in the chat box later. So we will have a team that will put the links in the chat box in Zoom, in FB, and also in YouTube live stream. Okay, so let's have a 5-minute break. So during that 5-minute break, we will play the promotional video for MS Care and enjoy.
We are facing one of the biggest challenges in history. Our earth is drying up. Don't let our future dry up before our eyes. Join me in starting a green revolution.
If we can warm up the earth, we can also cool it down. By greening up, it's that simple. The solution to climate change is vegetation. It's the air conditioning of our planet, and it eats carbon for breakfast. Through simple nature-based solutions, we can capture 20 billion tons of CO2 annually. This means that we can reverse climate change within 30 years. So let's green up to cool down. Here's how. With more tree cover on degraded farmlands and rangelands, we can triple the rate of biomass carbon. By increasing soil carbon and conserving the land, farmers can grow the size and reliability of crops and store huge amounts of carbon at the same time. By planting shrubs and food crops, we can capture carbon, fertilize crops, and provide wood fuel without reducing arable land. That's why millions of farmers in Africa have already adopted this. By 2050, the carbon stored from nature-based solutions can be used to bring energy to hundreds of millions of people. We have 4 billion hectares of forest land in the world, of which 1.7 billion hectares are degraded and treeless. Through empowering communities, we can turn 575 million hectares into healthy forests again. And last but not least, by suppressing fires and by regenerating pastures, we can bring back a healthy grass-tree balance, enhance food production for livestock, and improve animal welfare. So, dear members of the United Nations, the solution to climate change has already been found. These methods work. The only thing we need to do is to embrace them and join forces. Together, we can speed up and scale up. Together, we can reverse climate change. So, let's green up to cool down.
Okay, and we're back. Okay, so I can see here that we have questions pouring in. No, yeah. So Dr. Garrity, are you ready?
Roger. Shall we get started?
Yes, sir. And so for the first question, we have a question from Mr. Craig Jamieson. I love the optimistic vision. How can we hope to restore forests when currently so much existing tree cover is actively being cleared around the world?
Well, that's a good question, Craig. I have 2 points to share with you on that. One is that there are indeed about 50 countries in the world that are increasing in their tree cover. So they're a category of countries like the Philippines where tree cover is increasing because they have taken effective measures to protect their natural forest, to establish and expand agroforestry and other conservation measures. So there are also, as you implied, a number of countries where forest cover is still declining. And classic examples are Brazil, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Indonesia, the three big tropical rainforest countries. Now, FAO is showing that the rate of tropical deforestation is also declining, but it's got a long way to go. And most of the specialists are hopeful that the processes by which the global community, particularly the developed country donors, can in fact support these countries to enable them to forego the benefits of chopping down the trees and using the land for agriculture generally. And so the process has got to be accelerated, but indeed that is the responsibility of what is known as the United Nations RED program, the restoration of and protection of tropical forests. The program has not been terribly successful so far, but there's a new lease on life due to the Paris Agreement. And we simply have to find better ways to economically support those countries to forego the benefits of chopping down forests. I'm cautiously optimistic about this. It's going to take probably another couple of decades before we achieve that goal. But we've got to get started now because tropical deforestation is a huge contributor to the carbon dioxide emissions. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. So let's have the next question. I think it's not really a question, but I think it's a remark that's worthy to be discussed. And so from Sir Eric Buduan, tree cover is increasing, but not the original forest cover. What are expanding are tree cover from farms, fruit trees, and mostly plantations using exotic tree species and monocultures. This cannot be a realistic landscape restoration. So would you like to comment on that, Sir Garrity?
Yes. I believe you have a very good point that we have to protect our natural ecosystems. And restoration of natural ecosystems involves particularly the methods I was describing in terms of natural regeneration of vegetation. But much of the world's land surface, in fact, the majority of the world's land surface now is rangeland or agricultural land. And so we need a strategy for all three types of terrestrial land use, a strategy for forest lands, as well as for agriculture and rangelands. And yes, of course, in agriculture and rangelands, these areas are working lands. These are providing goods and services to farmers and rural people. And so, of course, the biodiversity will not be nearly as great as in natural ecosystems. I think we have to put emphasis on all three of these areas, and that's what our campaign is trying to do.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, just having some technical difficulties. Okay, and I'm back. Okay, thank you, sir. Next, we have a question from Sir Yulito Junior Casas from UPV Tacloban College. And thanks for the very informative and inspiring presentation. Can you please clarify whether the data on the increase greening of the Philippines is attributed to agroforestry practices or to the greening program of the government? I think it's quite related to the...
Well, as far as I recall, the data is related to all tree cover. In other words, the trend of all tree cover due to satellite image analysis. And as a result, it lumps together natural forest as well as plantation forest and agricultural land that has agroforestry on it. So indeed, one of the things I was implying in my remarks was that if we do the kind of high resolution analysis that could give us much better understanding of where these trees are in every municipality, we can then differentiate between agroforestry and natural forest ecosystems. But I think that another point is that the National Greening Program of the Philippines, which Rodel mentioned, is a flagship program that can certainly support the restoration process in the country. But if I may share my experience from many other countries, that government efforts to reforest and restore landscapes is often very disappointing. A lot of money spent, very little accomplished. And I think I can back that up in the Philippines from decades of experience with major reforestation programs that have failed. And the first phase of the regreening program in the Philippines was audited by the National Audit Unit, and they published an article in January indicating that the program achieved no more than 8% of its target after spending millions and millions of dollars. This is not atypical because governments are not particularly well suited to doing restoration. This is why I emphasize that it's up to us, it's up to the people, it's up to the NGOs, the civil society, the municipal governments, and the local grassroots to really make a difference, because government has so many structural problems of leadership in this area. Now, this is not to say that government wouldn't play an important role, absolutely. But let's be very, very realistic about how much government can accomplish. Even with millions of dollars of investment, they are often wasted, unfortunately, because of the structural problems of government forestry programs, which many of us are very much aware of. So I think it's an all around the table. It's an all-in approach to restoration. And I believe that perhaps if there's something we could really focus on right now, it's getting beyond sort of following government, but moving with government and moving in spite of government, if government's not moving, which is what we're doing in many countries where the government simply doesn't have the capability. But the citizenry who are mobilized can do so much in terms of restoration.
Thank you, sir. I think you're really speaking from experience.
Yeah. Many countries, yes.
Thank you, sir. Now let's have questions from YouTube. So we have a question from Amy Rara. Baguio has a regreening program. How can watersheds, now heavily populated, restore its pine wood forest?
Okay. Well, Amy, I'm not very familiar with the particular ecosystem. Perhaps my colleagues in UP Baguio or Rodel Lasco or someone might be able to address that. Is there anyone else that might want to take a shot at that question? I guess we'll have to go on. Let's go. We'll take a different, another question.
Yeah, from Professor Zinaida Bawanan of UP Baguio. Do they also monitor the kind of tree species being replanted in restored landscapes? If these are found to be non-native, what will be the next step to be done?
Well, in the restoration monitoring that I described, they are getting more and more capable of actually identifying individual species from the satellite imagery because the resolution is becoming so extremely detailed. And so species identification is more and more becoming possible. But the fact is that in native ecosystems, there are many species, and it's really not very easy to identify individual species, but more structural types of forest trees and vegetation. I think that it's becoming now very promising to examine where the trees are growing. And we will still, I think, need field survey work to get a better idea of what the species distribution is in any particular site. I think it's going to be quite a while before we have any artificial intelligence mechanisms for accurately estimating the species composition of a forest, you see. So there's still lots of work to be done on the ground.
After all, our breeding program should be science-based. So there's a lot of baselining that should be done before we can really proceed to this. Okay, so I think we can proceed to another question. And so we have a question from James Elian Garlit. I think he's one of our students. And thank you, Dr. Dennis Garrity, for your enlightening presentation. I have a question with regards on how we will be able to address a problem in agriculture in the Philippines. Yeah. Monoculture as a practice is used for cultivating crops, such as wheat and corn, to address the increasing demand of livestock. However, this process poses threats. In other words, decrease in biodiversity and carbon sequestration within the affected lands. The main question, how will we able to integrate a sustainable system of agroforestry in the cultivation of these crops along with other restoration programs?
Well, James, you've really hit upon the key conundrum of agroforestry, not only here in this country, but all over the world. The general practice of agriculture and agricultural science has always given precedence to monocultures rather than intercropping of perennials and annual crops. So we're really behind the eight ball. The whole of agricultural science assumes that monocultures are best and most efficient. Although the evidence is building up more and more strongly in many different systems that integrating crops and perennial plants can actually produce a much higher yield than one or the other in monoculture. And many perennial systems with permaculture, for example, are now reaching commercial scale in many countries. Not so much here in the Philippines, I'm afraid, but in countries like Brazil, where they're very popular. They're coming up in the temperate zone. I believe that we're going to be seeing more and more policy influence towards perennialized systems. And when that begins to happen, farmers have both more extension and policy support and subsidy support to be able to practice a more integrated agriculture. It's going to take time. One of the things that's going to be a big advantage for the perennialization of agriculture is that within the next 20 years or so, the global population is going to peak. It's going to reach a maximum and begin to decline. And when that happens, which will be before the middle of the century, From that point on, there will be no massive need for increasing the production of basic food calories any longer, because food production doesn't need to increase because of population. Population is no longer growing, it's declining. And so we will be able to see a window opening up for much more diversified, high value agricultural products, fruits, vegetables, tree starches, tree nuts, and all kinds of perennial products that are desirable but currently higher cost. And people will want to buy those products as they get more affluent. So affluence and the decline of population is going to have an enormous effect on improving the sustainability of agroecological systems of farming. And that will undoubtedly mean that more and more tree cover will be coming onto our farms.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Next, we have a question from Crystal K. Linsangan. And hello, sir. This is Crystal K. Linsangan, MS Care student, 2020-2021. I currently work at the National Irrigation Administration that manages Pantabangan Dam watershed. I am proud to hear positive news about our watershed. However, may I know some suggestions from you on how can we further improve or maintain our watershed? Thanks.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, so what I was doing was comparing the status of the Pantabangan watershed from the 1980s up until the present time. But if you look at the current satellite images, there's still a lot of areas that are grassland in that watershed. Presumably the same situation as earlier, where they burn every year. And I would say if you are interested in one particular practice that would make a great deal of difference in the increase in tree cover in Pantabangan, probably it's working with the communities to suppress fires. And that one factor is probably the fast, because as soon as fire is suppressed, the forest will come back. And when it's when it's not, the forest can never come back because it's burned out every year. The seedlings are burned out. So fire is the major issue in most of the areas that we see as Kogan grasslands around the country. They're burned annually, and the forest cannot restore. But the forest can come back very fast once burning is suppressed.
Thank you very much, sir. Now let's go to the next question. This is interesting. From Emily Oro from IIRR. Thanks for your great presentation, Dr. Garrity. In your experience in Africa, how was land tenurial systems affected restoration of farmlands?
Well, as we all know, if farmers do not have tenure control for their farms, they have very little incentive for restoring the land, obviously. And in Africa, most of the land is under a more communal approach to land tenure without land titles, individual land titles. It's kind of like the indigenous communities in the Philippines, which often have communal land as opposed to individual land titles. So that has been a major barrier for land restoration in the country. But because Africa is becoming very rapidly densely populated, at least in the areas that have decent soils for agriculture, although farmers don't have land titles, there is a recognition of individual family ownership, in parentheses or in quotations. That is, people recognize the land that's owned by your family and it's under your control, even though you don't have a land title. And as that process has gone underway, it has been a major opportunity and driver for better land management, because people feel more confident that The land that they have today will continue to be in their family for generations, and they begin to take efforts to improve the land, as I was describing for the farmers in Niger and Mali and Ethiopia, the examples that I showed. These are cases where people are permanently assured that they have control of the land and they can benefit from whatever land restoration practices they install on their land. So that's a good development, even though it's a long way off before there will be land titles available for most African farmers.
Thank you, sir. I think we can have the next question. Yan. Next question from Sebastian Jose Santos, BS Biology student from UP Baguio. This is in regards to the target numbers of reduced carbon dioxide emissions. Do these numbers take into consideration big corporations, which are usually culprits for the large carbon dioxide emissions? If so, how much emphasis should also be directed towards not only organizations, but also corporations in trying to reduce the emissions of carbon dioxide?
Well, Sebastian, here we've got to differentiate two separate things. One is the emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and the other is the drawdown of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now, corporations are major culprits in terms of huge amounts of fossil fuel emissions into the atmosphere. The oil companies, transport, airlines, cement, steel industries, and all sorts of other industries are the major drivers of the nearly 40 billion tons of CO2 that's emitted into the atmosphere every year. So there, the emphasis is on emissions reduction. And as you may know, there's a major drive right now called the Race to Zero, which is, it really picked up speed this year with hundreds of corporations being nudged to declare their commitment to zero emissions by 2050, zero net emissions. So while all of that is going on, we're driving emissions to zero, we also are ramping up the ability of the terrestrial ecosystem to capture and store carbon. And that is the basic purpose of the campaign. It's looking at the storage of carbon on the landscapes, on agriculture land, forest land, rangeland, where huge amounts of additional carbon can be stored. And that carbon is good, it's useful for increasing productivity and improving the health of the land and the ecosystem's regeneration for natural habitats, for biodiversity. So we have to kind of separate the two different situations. Both are absolutely essential. Reduce emissions, increase storage.
Thank you very much. And for the next question, again, indigenous tree species take much longer to propagate. Hence, which is ideal for forest restoration while waiting for indigenous species?
Could you repeat the question? You actually, I lost your connection for a while there. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sure, sir. Indigenous tree species take much longer to propagate, hence, which is ideal for forest restoration while waiting for indigenous species to grow?
Well, you know, actually indigenous species have a wide range of growth properties, and some indigenous species grow rapidly, very similarly to commercial timber species. And so one finds that actually because indigenous species have been given very little attention, there is a a belief that they're slow growing, and some of them are, of course, but there are many indigenous that are very fast growing as well. And so there's quite a range there. I think that we need, both indigenous species restoration for natural ecosystems, obviously, and we do need timber tree plantations for the production of wood and wood products that are under such demand. If our plantations do not supply the wood that's required in industry and home building, unfortunately, the demand will just simply create such a pressure on the natural forest that natural forests cannot be protected. So we need a combination of the two. And it's best to think about a balance between the support that's needed for growing trees like crops in timber plantations to supply our wood needs, and consequently drawing the attention, pressure away from the natural forests, which will never be protected fully unless we can grow our wood outside the forests. What we at the World Agroforestry Center particularly promote is the concept that smallholders are the foresters of the future, that growing trees as crops on smallholder farms in intercropping systems, farm woodlots, border planting, etc., can be a very lucrative opportunity for farmers to build their asset base, because trees are like a bank account. They grow in value over time, and they're farmers need the money. So we really believe that the future is not necessarily in large-scale industrial timber plantations, but let's work with the hundreds of millions of smallholder farm families who could benefit from having a few extra to be used for and therefore provide value.
Thank you, sir. And so next, let's have a question from Mr. Joseph Pantoja, an MS student. In the restoration of Philippine uplands and forest lands, the major obstacle is, I think this is the main question, how to influence communities to gradually change in their farmlands to incorporate native indigenous trees. So I think he's asking for your experience.
Yes. Well, Joseph, the very first and fundamental thing you have to ask yourself is, what are the incentives for people to grow trees? There's no point in trying to convince people, particularly poor or disadvantaged people, to become ecologists and to do a nice natural restoration of their environment if they need to make an income. And so our whole approach has to build around enterprises that these folks can adopt for their own benefit. So incorporating native indigenous trees into their systems really brings up the question, well, which indigenous trees would be moneymakers? Which indigenous trees would be useful to them for their services, for their products that they can sell or they can use locally? That's the key thing to start the process of figuring out what is the best restoration plan for a particular area. And in any farming community, generally, there is some balance between the value that farmers see in indigenous trees versus in planted high value trees. And you have to be flexible, because you cannot even start the process of engaging communities in restoration unless they are cultivating the trees that they find valuable and useful to them. And that's how you would build a restoration program.
Thank you, sir. Okay. So we have one participant who's raising her hand, Ms. Cynthia Kizon. Yes.
Sylvia.
Miss Cynthia.
Cynthia?
Sorry, sir, napindot ko lang.
Okay. Okay. No problem.
Yeah.
We have, but for the rest of the participants, if you would want to share something or maybe ask a follow-up or related question, you may use the raise hand button. Okay. So it's also a reminder for us. Okay, so actually, Mr. Joseph would have a second question. So I'll just continue his question. Yeah. If we also incorporate fuel wood species into agricultural farms, which would be used for fuel and energy, is there a way to improve how fuel wood can be transformed into energy production?
Well, in the Sri Lankan system, where Gliricidia is the main species that's used for fuel wood in electrical power generation,
Can you tell them?
the farmers will actually sell the wood at the farm gate to distributors who pick it up and deliver it to the power plants. And there it's chipped and fed into the boilers for making electrical power. Now, there are many points along the way where both the agricultural part of the system can be improved, as well as the engineering part. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done all along the chain in terms of improving the value of the commodity and the logistics of collecting it and paying for the and the power plant management. But it's a very, very interesting system because, as you may know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projects that there's no way that we are going to be able to avoid massive temperature increases beyond 2 degrees C if we do not use a process called bioenergy carbon capture and storage, which is basically growing forest trees on hundreds of millions of hectares of land and using the trees to power biomass electrical facilities and capturing the carbon dioxide that emerges from the process and then storing that carbon dioxide so it doesn't get back into the atmosphere. That's how you create a negative emissions situation. But along the way, they also admit that there's no chance that you can do that because where are the hundreds of millions of hectares of free land going to come from? We don't have the land to transform back into forestry from agriculture. We have to do something more creative. And this is why we in the Evergreening Alliance put so much stock into the solution of cacahuate and other types of leguminous shrubs, which can be grown in the crop fields with the crops, improving the crop yields, doubling and tripling the yield of the crops, providing highly nutritious fodder for livestock, and at the same time, producing the wood that can be used to produce electricity and capture the carbon and store the carbon. So this is a win-win situation that is so much more practical and feasible than the bioenergy carbon capture and storage models of the IPCC. And we're working very hard to convince people that this area demands a whole lot more attention. Yes, there's a lot of piloting that needs to be done, but Sri Lanka has shown the way. And the whole system is working in Sri Lanka, so other countries can get the lessons that they need to adopt it and provide a very interesting alternative to our current bioenergy systems.
Yeah, it's good to hear that we have these model communities.
Yeah, yeah.
Next, we have, I think we can entertain 3 more questions. Yeah, yes, okay. We have a question from Ezekiel Salinas, a student of MS Care program. I just would like to ask if, do you see hope in the emerging integration of profit-driven tourism in the restoration of our forest lands?
Well, in general, yes. You know, I have been living in Nairobi, Kenya for 20 years. And of course, in Kenya, which has fairly large areas of national parks with charismatic wildlife, you know, the wildebeest migrations, the the elephants, tigers, the elephants, lions, and rhinos, etc. Country earns about a fifth of its gross national product from tourism. So, you know, it's very, tourism can be a very lucrative way of supporting conservation. And it is the tourism receipts in Kenya that have been the basis for improving the national parks. So here in the Philippines, where we don't have, you know, real many charismatic wildlife. It's obviously not as dramatic a situation in East Africa, the plains of East Africa, but there is still a great deal to appeal to people who want to get out into natural ecosystems country, and clearly there's a lot of examples of other countries in the region and elsewhere that have taken advantage of that to earn some receipts to improve and expand their conservation activities. So I think there is potential, but it will require a lot of effort and creativity to do it right.
Okay, thank you, sir. And so we have this next question from Adrian D. Good afternoon, sir. My name is Adrian D, and I have a question. Personally, I believe that the country continues to face degradation of our natural resources or lands. The property owned by private sectors seem to continuously overcrowd our land. What is your stand on the impacts of overpopulation to the environmental status in the context of Philippine situation?
Okay, well, the way I've always seen this problem is that you know, the size of a population is not the problem. It's the rate of growth of the population. It's how fast the population is growing. Because in countries where the population grows at a modest speed, there is more resources available per capita for schools and hospitals, infrastructure of all kinds. And that can enable more rapid poverty alleviation, more rapid increase in the middle class. But when population growth rates are very fast, as they have been in the Philippines until fairly recently, this has really put a damper on the ability of families to both provide enough services to their children and enough good education and jobs. So it is encouraging that the rate of population growth is declining in the Philippines, although it's faster than virtually any other country in the region. But it is going down, and I think that will accelerate because of the urbanization process here. And that will be very good for the future welfare of everyone, particularly the youth who come out of school and have to compete with many others who are in the job market, and there's no jobs. So it's very clear to see that reducing the rate of population growth is the key, is one of the very big keys to the future prosperity of the Philippines. And I'm seeing positive signs that urbanization and increased family income are beginning to put the fertility rate is declining. It is declining, and it has declined in countries all over the world, such that I think it will begin to be more similar to other countries, and that will further accelerate the rate of poverty alleviation in this country.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Now let's have another question from one of our younger students, from Jamin Santos. Good afternoon, I'm Jamin Santos, a first-year bio student of UP Baguio. I would like to know the solutions of the Global Evergreening Alliance to counter naturally occurring forest fires. What kind of methods are applied to achieve restoration within these areas? And are there ways that we can reduce the possibilities of forest fires from happening? And thank you.
That's a wonderful question. And of course, a question that's particularly on the minds of our professionals who are working in places like Australia and California, where over the past 8 months, we have had catastrophic fires over tens of millions of hectares in both of these countries, both in Australia and California. Now, I unfortunately am not an expert on forest fire management, but what I have been doing is drawing together a working group of the professionals in forest management and fire management. And I've challenged them with the question, how do we redesign our forests for sustainability when we see that currently, at least in the Mediterranean climates, like Australia and California, we are headed for continual disasters year after year after year. There has to be a complete rethink of how forests are created and managed in the future. This could be different ways of controlling the density of trees, the species of trees, the way in which you control burn to reduce the amount of litter that is flammable. There are many aspects to this. And of course, there's a lot of people thinking about this problem right now. So although I don't have any answers myself, I can say that we're in the Alliance, we see this as a huge problem. And it's going to get worse and worse. And even in relatively tropical, humid countries like the Philippines, fire will become a greater risk in the future than it is today, most likely, at least in parts of the country. And so we've got to redesign our approach to healthy forests. And I believe we should start exchanging the best successes out there. So who is actually successful in managing forests to suppress fires, and how can we adapt those principles all around the world? That's what I'm hoping we can do.
Thank you, sir. So we still have some questions pouring in, but I think we can just collate them. Some are actually overlapping questions. So for the other participants, just send your questions. We'll collate them, and we'll try to send them to Sir Garrity and maybe have them answered. Yeah.
I would be happy to do that. I would be happy to.
So, but sir, maybe this question's from me. Yeah. So I'm really interested with the National Restoration Working Group. So my question is, how do you suggest to start this evergreening initiative, or what is the step one? What is the first practical step for us to put it into context for students like me or budding researchers like me? What is the first practical step that we can do to be involved in the National Restoration Working Group?
Well, at this point, I just was, of course, raising the possibility of doing that and trying to start a dialogue to see, what other professionals thought of the idea, and whether it actually would be useful in relation to other types of programs that are currently being implemented in the Philippines. Rodel mentioned the greening program, etc. And so I was basically opening the door to such a discussion. What I was planning to do after this webinar was to get back in touch with colleagues around the country to see what their thinking was now that we've been talking about it, and to therefore see if there's a consensus on how we can pull together the right way of taking this forward, and providing a terms of reference for what a working group could do, and going from there. So what I would suggest to you and others that are interested would be to write to me by email to let me know about your interest, so I can keep a list of all of the folks who are interested in participating in such a working group. And then as we carry on to get this organized, then we can build around your interest to create the working group and to set it off. And as I think Ravi mentioned earlier, Ravi said that we ought to consider having a series of webinar discussions where we can continue to take aspects, facets of this issue, and have a wide variety of people come in to share their views and have discussions around this. And if this is a particular interest, what we could do in say having a series of further events, we have a short maybe warm up, and then have more of a discussion over the Skype, over the Zoom, to take, for example, we might have a discussion on a national working group. Where do we go from here? That would be a very interesting conversation, which could be done very nicely over Zoom. So I think that would be great.
Thank you, sir. Okay, mga kapwa ko estudyante sa MS Care, yan. Email is the key. Okay, so I think that wraps up the Q&A portion, the open forum. So may I call on Maverick to take over, Mavs?
Thank you very much, Sir Geno, for facilitating our question and answer. And I would like to thank everybody for that very informative and engaging question and answer portion, especially Dr. Dennis Garrity, and also our panel members, Sir Rodel and Dr. Ravi Joshi, and of course, our very own Professor Gutierrez. But before we end this webinar, may I please have this opportunity to award, in behalf of our colleagues here at the University of the Philippines, Baguio, your certificate, Dr. Dennis Garrity. All right. To read, College of Science, University of the Philippines, Baguio, Governor Park Road, City of Baguio 2600, Philippines, Certificate of Appreciation. The Certificate of Appreciation is awarded to Dr. Dennis Garrity for sharing his time and expertise by serving as a resource speaker during the webinar entitled Evergreening the Earth and Opportunities for Landscape Restoration in the Philippines, awarded this 19th of October at the College of Science, University of the Philippines, Baguio, Baguio City, Philippines. Signed, Dr. Juancho A. Collera, Chair of the College of Science Lecture Series Committee, and of course, our Dean, Dr. Dimfna Javier. Thank you very much, Dr. Garrity. Sir Geno?
Please invite Willie.
Okay, thank you, Maverick. Yeah, so again, thank you very much, Dr. Garrity. Would you like to share some final comments, maybe?
Well, I would just say I I was reflecting after this 2-hour event that I don't think my own dissertation exam was as grueling as the questions from all of our participants today. It was excellent. So I was really sweating to answer all these good questions. But thank you all very, very much. And I do hope to hear from you if you are interested to carry on the dialogue in this area. And as I say, we'll be looking at exploring the development of a working group and to see where it takes us in terms of creating that momentum in restoration in the Philippines. We're on the right track. We're moving in the right direction. And now it's a matter of maybe moving a little bit faster. So thank you all very much for joining today.
Thank you too. Thank you very much. Okay,
Thank you also to our viewers and participants in the Zoom, the FB Live, and YouTube. The College of Science would like to again invite you for our future webinars. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you. So for the participants, don't forget to fill out the forms to get your certificate. Ay, i-end na daw po ba?